What kind of species makes an alien scream just by being touched? The Watcher entered the human's mind expecting logic, and found rage, grief, love, and something worse, unshakable hope. It screamed, collapsed, and the galaxy would never feel safe again. Zelta was no ordinary being. He was a Watcher and elite mind reader, feared across the galaxy for his cold precision and terrifying power. He had read the thoughts of warlords, dictators, and entire civilizations. He had seen madness, genocide, the rise and fall of empires all. Without flinching, nothing had ever broken him. Until Earth. The planet was still new to the Galactic Tribunal. A quiet blue world on the edge of known space. Primitive, they thought. Emotional, yes, but predictable. Zelta was sent to scan the human delegate, Captain Rhys Morgan, a former soldier and Earth's official representative. Just a standard mind read, a routine scan, and then on to the next system. But the moment he placed his hand on Rhys's temple and entered the man's thoughts, something went horribly wrong. Zelta expected structure memories filed neatly, emotions controlled. Instead, he fell into chaos. Not random disorder, but a storm of memories layered with pain, love, rage, loyalty, and something far worse, choice. He saw Rhys holding a friend's hand as he bled out on Titan's battlefield, whispering promises he couldn't keep. He saw children screaming during an orbital bombardment trace carrying two at a time through smoke and fire. He saw Rhys killing when he had to, crying when no one was watching, forgiving enemies who didn't deserve it, and breaking rules to save lives. Zelta didn't just see memories, he felt them. The grief, the anger, the guilt. The kind of guilt that lives inside a man's bones, that wakes him in the middle of the night and never lets go. He felt the pressure of command, the pain of loss, and the terrifying bottomless depth of human willpower. Then came the love. Rhys's mother's voice singing in the kitchen. A photo of his daughter tucked into a broken armor plate. Letters he never sent to a woman he still dreamed about. These emotions weren't data, they were fire. They burned through Zelta's mental defenses like acid. He tried to pull away, but the human mind held him there. Not out of malice, but because it didn't even notice him. Rhys wasn't projecting. He was surviving. And that survival felt like a roar inside his head. A defiant scream to the universe. I will not break. The alien convulsed, his body shaking, mouth wide as a scream erupted not from fear, but from understanding. For the first time in his existence, Zelta couldn't contain what he saw. His knees buckled. Blood vessels in his nose burst. He collapsed in front of the tribunal, shrieking like a child, seeing death for the first time. Security bots drew weapons, diplomats gasped. Even Rhys looked surprised. The chamber, once buzzing with chatter, went silent. A Watcher, a god among readers, was reduced to a broken shell by a single human. Not a super soldier, not a psychic. Just a man who had seen too much, and kept going. That's when it hit everyone. Earth was not what they thought. Rhys stepped back, hands raised slowly, as if unsure whether to help or run. Told you not to poke around, he muttered, not as a threat, but as a warning. And for the first time in the tribunal's history, they feared the one species they barely understood. Not because of their weapons, not because of their strength, but because of what lived inside them. What kind of mind survives so much darkness, and still hopes for light? As medbots rushed to revive Zelta, a single question echoed through the chamber, unspoken but deafening. What if all humans are like this? The room fell silent. Not the kind of silence that comes after a speech or a pause in conversation, but the kind that hits like a thunderclap after a scream. Tribunal members sat frozen in their crystal thrones, their shimmering robes still, fluttering slightly from the echo of the Watcher's collapse. Security drones hovered mid-air, weapons trembling in their mechanical grips, unsure whether to aim at the human or just shut down from confusion. No one had seen anything like it. For over 300 years, Watchers, telepathic giants of the Galactic Tribunal, had moved between minds like shadows through glass. They had read tyrants, monsters, galactic criminals, entire warborn species. Never once had a watcher lost control. Never once had a watcher screamed. But now Zelta, the most experienced among them, lay unconscious. Blood seeping from the corners of his mouth, his skin pale with psychic shock. And all of it happened because he touched the mind of one human. One man. Rhys Morgan didn't move. He stood still in the center of the tribunal floor, hands at his sides, eyes watching the scene unfold. His jaw was tight, his expression unreadable. But he wasn't afraid. He wasn't even confused. If anything, he looked disappointed. Slowly, he exhaled and muttered, just loud enough for the audio pickups to transmit. His voice to every translator in the room told you not to go digging. The words weren't angry, not even mocking. They sounded tired, like someone who had seen too much, warned too often, and knew exactly how this would end. Rhys didn't move toward the Watcher. He didn't reach for help. He simply watched as med drones poured into the room, surrounding Zelta's convulsing body with scanners and containment foam. A bright blue force field snapped around the area. But the real energy shift wasn't technical, it was emotional. The tribunal, made of beings from 27 different worlds, suddenly felt very small. Every eye was on Rhys, but not in the way they usually watched a new species, amused, condescending. No. This time, they looked at him the way children stare at the ocean after hearing a storm is coming. The silence didn't just hang in the air, it pressed on their lungs. That's when it hit them. It wasn't just Rhys. It wasn't just a fluke. If one human could do that to a Watcher without lifting a finger, then what lived inside all humans? What emotional weapon? What psychological fire burned in the souls of an entire planet that had survived war, famine, betrayal, love, and still walked forward with their heads up? The tribunal wasn't afraid of Rhys's muscles or Earth's technology. They were afraid of something far more dangerous. The depth of the human spirit, the way it held pain, the way it used pain. How do you control something that grows stronger every time it suffers? How do you manage a species that breaks and then puts itself back together, sharper, louder, harder than before? Rhys hadn't attacked anyone. He hadn't raised his voice. But somehow, just by standing still, he had become the most dangerous thing in the room. Behind the force field, Zelta stirred and began to whisper nonsense in 3 languages, his mind scrambling to reboot from the mental overload. No form, ... no center. He forgave her. He kept fighting. The tribunal guards lowered their weapons. Some of the diplomats whispered among themselves. One leaned close to another and asked, did he do this on purpose? But the truth was worse. Rhys didn't do anything. This was just who he was. This was what happened when you looked too closely into a human soul. Not just chaos, not just pain, but something ancient and terrifying. A heart that still hoped after everything had been burned. That's what broke the Watcher. Not fear, not death, hope. Rhys finally shifted, adjusting the collar of his uniform, then looked up. So, ... Are we still doing introductions? The joke landed like a bomb. A few nervous chuckles sparked, but most sat in silence. No one answered, because deep down, they all knew the truth. This room wasn't safe anymore. Not from Rhys Morgan, but from what might live inside every other human just like him. Inside Zelta's mind, the world had turned into a burning sea. He wasn't in the tribunal chamber anymore. He was inside the storm inside. The human Rhys Morgan's memories didn't unfold like a calm story or a structured archive. No, they exploded. Each moment hit like lightning. He saw flames, broken cities, bodies buried in dust. But even worse than the visuals were the feelings that hit with full force and refused to let go. Zelta wasn't just observing, he was living it. In 1 second, he was in a battlefield drenched in acid rain, with Rhys crawling through shrapnel to pull a screaming soldier out of a burning trench. In the next, he was sitting alone in a dark room, tears rolling down Rhys's face as he held a letter he'd written but would never send to a woman whose voice he still heard in dreams. Then, in a blinding flash, Zelta was standing beside Rhys, looking down at the hand of an enemy. Someone Reese could have left to die, but he didn't. Reese had saved him, carried him, risked his life for someone who had tried to kill him. Why Zelta couldn't understand it. The logic wasn't there. The reward didn't exist. Yet the action was real. And behind every choice Reese made, there was no clear answer. Only layers of regret, of courage, of pain twisted into purpose. Zelta tried to exit the mind link. He focused, gritted his teeth, summoned every psychic defense. But nothing worked. It wasn't because Reese was trapping him, it was because the storm inside Reese had no exit. The memories weren't gates, they were waves, crashing endlessly, one after another, over and over. Each one heavier than the last. Reese hadn't just suffered, he had embraced suffering. He had become better because of it. What kind of creature does that? What kind of being walks into fire again and again, knowing it will hurt, and chooses to keep going anyway? Zelta had read billions of minds. He had felt fear, hatred, triumph. But this was something else. Reese was no hero in his own mind. He was full of guilt, haunted by faces of those he couldn't save. But inside that guilt was strength, the kind that doesn't break when the weight becomes unbearable, adapts, it transforms, and it never lets go of hope. That's what made it worse. Not the war, not the killing, not even the loss. It was the hope. Buried under every wound, every trauma, was a small glowing ember that whispered, "Try again." That's what made Reese dangerous. That's what made humans terrifying. They didn't just feel more. They carried their pain like armor. Their grief became fuel. And when everything around them collapsed, they reached deeper and stood back up. Not because they had to, but because something inside them refused to stay down. Zelta couldn't understand it. It made no evolutionary sense, it made no psychic sense. It was pure contradiction. Chaos wrapped in meaning. And yet, it was working. Somehow, this species of flawed, impulsive, emotional creatures had taken pain raw, endless pain, and turned it into something beautiful, something powerful, something unstoppable. Zelta finally felt something he had never experienced before. In all his travels through 1,000 minds, he felt small. And in that moment, he realized the truth. This wasn't just Reese. Reese wasn't special. He was typical. A standard human. A product of Earth's brutal, beautiful design. And that meant there were billions more like him. Billions of storms. Billions of walking paradoxes. Creatures who could be broken and still rise. Creatures who could cry and still fight. Creatures who could be afraid and still move forward. That realization hit Zelta harder than any weapon ever could. Because for the first time in his long existence, he wasn't afraid of death. He was afraid of understanding. Afraid of what he'd just witnessed. Afraid of the species that wasn't built for control, but for resistance. The mind link began to collapse as his own mind overloaded, unable to process the storm any longer. And as darkness pulled him under, Zelta's final thought wasn't a word. It was a feeling. One wordless echo, deep and primal. This is what survival really looks like. Zelta's body was weak, but his mind was shattered in ways he didn't know were possible. He awoke in the Tribunal's medchamber, wrapped in silence, hovering in a stasis field meant to contain psychic trauma. But no containment field could silence what he had seen. He wasn't angry. He wasn't confused. He was terrified. Not of the human named Reese Morgan, but of what lived inside him. What lived inside all of them. As tribunal members gathered to ask their questions, their voices were soft, respectful. For the first time in centuries, they treated a watcher like a wounded soul, not a tool. Zelta sat up slowly, eyes hollow. Then, with trembling breath, he spoke. "They're not like us," he said quietly. "They don't run on logic or instinct. They run on something far more dangerous. They choose." One ambassador leaned in, puzzled. "Choose what?" Zelta turned to face him, his expression filled with haunted awe. "Pain," he said. "They choose pain. They choose to carry it. They choose to stand inside it. They choose to bleed. and keep walking. The room froze. These were the most powerful leaders in the galaxy, creatures with empires under their command, but none of them had words. Because something about what he said felt wrong, and yet completely true. Most species avoided suffering. They built systems to eliminate discomfort. They bred weakness out of their lines. They deleted emotion when it became inconvenient. But humans didn't run from the fire. They ran into it, and came out changed. Sharper, stronger, more dangerous. Zelta continued, his voice growing stronger as he relived it. I saw his guilt, his grief. He's not proud of what he's done. He carries the faces of the dead with him, but he keeps going. He learns from it. He turns sorrow into strength. Who does that? The ambassador from the Telari Prime murmured. That's not survival. That's something else. Exactly, Zelta nodded. It's not survival. It's identity. It's who they are. They don't just endure, they grow through it. They become more dangerous after every loss. Because every scar becomes a weapon. A quiet whisper rippled through the tribunal, words in different languages, translated into fear. Rhys Morgan hadn't threatened anyone. He had said nothing cruel. He'd barely spoken at all. And yet, the most advanced psychic in the galaxy was now warning them about the danger of just being human. Not their weapons, not their ships, but their hearts. He's just one man, a voice finally said. Yes, Zelta replied, and he's not even the strongest. He's just the most honest. That's when the silence broken up with fear, but with something far more nervous, humor. One small insectoid delegate near the corner leaned toward another and muttered, "SOOO. Invasion's off the table." Another, shaking slightly, added, "Maybe we just send them snacks and hope they stay happy." A few awkward chuckles bubbled up. Even the protocol droid glitched, letting out an unnatural burst of laughter. It wasn't joy, it was panic wearing a mask. Because deep down, everyone knew the truth. This wasn't about war. It was about fear of what they couldn't understand. Rhys hadn't shown strength through dominance. He had shown strength through vulnerability. Through carrying pain without collapsing. And in a universe built on control, that kind of strength was unthinkable. Zelta leaned forward, voice low but clear. You cannot intimidate them. You cannot manipulate them. You cannot erase what makes them strong. They don't run from the dark, they use it, and they walk out holding light in their hands. Another ambassador whispered, "Then what do we do?" Zelta didn't answer for a long moment. Then finally, he whispered, "We listen, we learn, or we run." And in that single quiet moment, the Galactic Tribunal realized something terrifying. Earth wasn't behind the rest of the galaxy. It was ahead, not in weapons, not in ships, but in something the stars had forgotten, what it means to feel deeply, and still rise. The Tribunal had always believed that Earth's danger lay in its machines. They studied its nuclear arsenal, analyzed its artificial intelligence networks, and catalogued its bioweapons. They thought humans were threatening because of their inventions, their speed of advancement, their appetite for conquest. But they were wrong, so very wrong. The real weapon was not a bomb or a machine. It was the human mind, and not just its intelligence, but its resilience, its depth, its capacity to feel, and still keep functioning. Rhys Morgan didn't walk into the tribunal chamber carrying a gun or wearing armor. He carried memories, pain, regret, hope, and somehow, all those things made him more dangerous than any weapon Earth had ever built. What truly shocked the tribunal was not the damage he could do, but the damage he had already endured and still stood tall. Rhys had seen war. Not just the quick, clean battles of lasers and drones, but the kind of war that broke your soul and made you question whether the sun would ever rise again. He had held dying friends. He had watched innocent lives disappear in fire. He had made choices that would haunt him for the rest of his life. And yet, he still hoped. He still stood for peace. And that terrified them. Because most species break under pressure. Most lose their will after enough suffering. But not humans. Humans take pain and turn it into fuel. They take loss and build meaning from it, they fall, they scream, they cry, and then they rise again, stronger. Reese was living proof. Not because he was superhuman, but because he was exactly human. He didn't hide his scars. He wore them like armor. And when the Watcher touched his mind, it wasn't numbers or coordinates that sent the alien into shock. It was human emotion. It was the weight of memories stacked on top of each other, like bricks in a burning cathedral. The alien had touched that storm, and it broke him, because he had no shield for the one thing no technology can replicate, the human soul. For centuries, the Tribunal had believed that strength came from control of emotions, of systems, of people. But humans didn't fight for control. They fought for meaning, for love, for belief. That's what made them different. That's what made them dangerous. Not the weapons they created, but the reasons they picked them up. The fire behind the trigger. Reese didn't want to destroy anyone. He didn't even want revenge. What made him powerful was that, after everything, he still chose compassion. Still offered peace. Still believed in the future. That was Earth's real weapon, not death, but the refusal to give up on life, and the galaxy wasn't ready for it. They weren't prepared for a species that wouldn't kneel. Not because of pride, but because kneeling meant giving up, and giving up meant betraying the memory of everyone they had lost. The humans didn't fight for conquest. They fought because they had been broken and refused to stay broken. The Tribunal watched Reese closely now, no longer as an ambassador, but as a symbol of something far more frightening. Hope that could not be extinguished. In that moment, the galaxy realized a brutal truth. Earth's greatest weapon could not be stopped with shields or hacked by code. It couldn't be negotiated with or shut down, because it lived inside them. It was past. In lullabies, forged in funerals, whispered in trenches. It was emotional endurance. And if even one man could carry so much pain and still believe in peace, what could billions of humans do? That question echoed in every corner of the chamber. They had come looking for weakness. What they found was a force older than any star, the human will. And it didn't need a trigger. It had already been pulled. Behind the towering golden doors of the Galactic Tribunal, the debate raged like a quiet storm. Voices didn't rise in volume, but in weight. Each word spoken felt like a shift in gravity. These were the most powerful leaders in the galaxy, representing civilizations that had conquered space, bent time, and erased extinction more than once. But now, they were afraid. Not of weapons, not of warships, but of one human. Or more accurately, what he represented. Reese Morgan had walked into their chamber without raising a hand, and yet managed to shake the very foundations of their order. Now, behind closed doors, those who once laughed at Earth's primitiveness now sat in tense silence, rethinking everything they believed about strength, control, and survival. One faction, led by the analytical Varn counselors, insisted Earth must be quarantined. Their minds are unstable, one of them said. Emotionally weaponized, unpredictable. They pose a long-term existential threat. Another argued, what happens if they unite? What happens when they fully understand their own power? They showed clips humans in riots, humans in war, humans breaking their own planet. They painted Earth as a volatile sphere of fire and chaos, but others disagreed. Quietly, but firmly. A group of elder diplomat species that had lost their fire centuries ago whispered another truth, a darker one. What if they're what we've been missing? One ancient ambassador, her skin made of crystal and her mind stretched across 3 dimensions, stood and addressed the chamber. Lost our spirit long ago, she said. We replaced passion with procedure, emotion with data, purpose with process. And what did it get us? A galaxy full of order and emptiness. She paused, then added, these humans, they still dream. Her words carried weight, not because of drama, but because of history. Her species had survived 10 extinctions, but had grown cold. In the process, she wasn't admiring humanity's violence. She was in awe of their hope. It was hard to admit, but it was true. Humans still believed in change, in love, in rising from ashes and building again, and that kind of hope, in the hands of billions, could be a weapon or a salvation. Another representative leaned forward, his 6 glowing eyes narrowing. "So what now?" he asked. "Invite them in, and hope they don't destroy us later." But the room already felt different. The fear hadn't gone, but something else had taken root. Curiosity, because in a galaxy built on control, maybe the only way forward was with a species that didn't need control to survive. A species that turned pain into progress. Who else could face a universe this broken and still choose to believe in something better? Who else could lead when the stars started going out? The idea was terrifying, but also tempting. They didn't know what the future held, but they knew what the past had delivered: stagnation. Systems so old, they'd stopped asking why. Maybe what the galaxy needed wasn't more rules. Maybe it needed a spark. The vote wasn't cast with cheers or ceremony. It happened in silence, through neural links and thought pulses. And when the final result came in, the room sat still. Earth would not be banned, nor quarantined, nor controlled. Instead, they would be watched, yes, studied, but also welcomed. A risky choice, a dangerous one, but also possibly the only one that still meant something. As the chamber doors opened again and light spilled into the dark room, one counselor leaned over and whispered to another, "We're either saving the galaxy or inviting in the storm that finally ends it." The reply came slowly, with the trace of something no one had heard in that room for centuries. A small, quiet laugh. "Maybe," the ambassador said, "but at least we'll feel alive again." As the tribunal chamber slowly emptied, the last of the delegates retreating behind shimmering doors, a strange silence hung in the air, not the cold silence of power, but the heavy silence of reflection. Rhys Morgan stood alone in the center of the great hall, surrounded by artificial light, alien carvings, and floating monitors still flickering with unread data. But no one cared about screens anymore. No one cared about reports. All that mattered now was what had happened and what might happen next. Zelta, still pale and visibly shaken, moved toward Rhys. Not with fear, but with something deeper. Almost like reverence. His steps were slow, as if every movement felt too loud in the presence of a being he no longer fully understood. The tribunal watched from a distance, silent and still. As the galaxy's most powerful mind reader faced the man who had broken something inside, Hammond replaced it with awe. Zelta stopped just a few feet away from Rhys, eyes glowing. Dimly, voice low but unshaken. "We feared your kind would be violent," he said. The words weren't accusation, they were confession. Rhys, ever calm, gave a small smirk, his voice dry. "Aren't we?" It wasn't sarcasm, it was honesty. He wasn't there to paint a perfect picture of humanity. He was there to show the truth. But Zelta shook his head slowly. "No," he said. "You're worse." That made Rhys raise an eyebrow. "You're kind." The words landed like a thunderclap in the silence. "You love," Zelta continued. "You mourn, you forgive, you feel everything and, still, you keep going. You fight not because you must, but because you care." His voice cracked slightly, not from weakness, but from the weight of knowing. "And you never give up. That's what scares us most." The words hit harder than any weapon. In the eyes of the tribunal, strength had always meant power, domination, superiority. But in that moment, they saw that true power was something far more dangerous: the refusal to quit, even when the universe breaks you. Rhys didn't speak. He didn't need to. His silence said everything. He turned slightly, not to walk away but to let the moment settle like dust over centuries of misunderstanding. And then, with a shimmer of light, Zelta vanished. Not with a threat, not with fear, but with respect. A deep, painful, undeniable respect for a species that wasn't defined by logic or force, but by its impossible capacity to suffer and still offer peace. And as Rhys left the chamber, walking alone down the long corridor of alien glass and ancient judgment, a quiet ripple moved through the tribunal, through the entire galactic network. Across star systems, on ships and stations, and colonies, whispers began to grow. Whispers of Earth, of humanity, not as monsters, not as primitives, but as something else, something unpredictable, something terrifying, something inspiring. Some would fear them, others would seek them out, alliances would shift, borders would tighten. But one truth now echoed louder than ever across the stars. Earth had arrived. And Earth remembered everything, not in anger, but in purpose. The real war wasn't fought with weapons. It was fought with memory, with meaning. And in that quiet aftermath, the galaxy finally understood humanity's greatest weapon was the human soul. Not one soul, billions, scarred, forged, still burning, and they were just getting started.